So Mr. Knightley suggested that Mr. Martin marry Harriet because he looked and he thought, yeah, this is a pretty good match. She doesn't have, you know, Harriet seems like a reasonably intelligent person. She's pretty. She's good mannered. So, this would be a good match for the gentleman farmer or for the farmer Mr. Martin. And, he doesn't have land, he doesn't have property, he doesn't rent it. Well, he rents out property, but he does well enough for himself and has plans to grow and build. And Mr. Knightley's thinking, hey, this kid, because he's in his 20s, he's not, Mr. Knightley's older. He's thinking, this kid has a good business plan. He looks like he can make something of himself. He's a hard worker. And Mr. Knightley was like, yeah, this is a brilliant match. And Emma was like, no, I had Harriet shoot him down. And Mr. Knightley is like, what? This is a great match for Harriet. She has no name. She has no money. She has nothing really to recommend herself beyond being a pretty face and not being like a shrew. Yes, she's nice. Yes, she's pretty. But, there's more than that. It's, she had none of the social graces, none of the real social training. This is something that kind of comes up in Pride and Prejudice, which I may end up doing next because, Pride and Prejudice, another great book written a couple years earlier than this. But it has a lot of the social things where it's like the women at the time were expected to entertain and matchmake, was supposed to entertain and do business connections. So if you had so if I were a wealthy gentleman sort of type, Lolly's job would be to host parties for my business associates. And, she would go and she would bring the business associates and she would entertain them and music and drawings and whatever. And then we would go and talk business on the side. And that's how things were done, where it's like you have this social circle and the women held the social circle together. So the women held the social circle together. So you just walk into the guy's place of business and he's like, yeah, who are you? But you have a party, you get the friends over, and you have a party, you get the friends over, you start talking, and it's more relaxed, and it's like, oh, sure, I'll do you this favor, I'll sell you the 100 bales of cotton at 10% below. And, so you get these friendships, or, yeah, you have first dibs on my corn. Or, sure, I'll give you a better price on the tobacco or the rum or the whatever. And so, you'd make these deals. But the thing is that the women kept these things bonded together. And so the wives went and they did their talking and they invited the people over and they had the parties where all of these side business deals were done. And so Harriet didn't have the training to host the party. She didn't have the musical skills that Emma did. And Emma's, as I said last time, were limited, but she still had them. She did the drawings and, they weren't the best, but they were good enough. And so if Emma's father were inclined to do more business, it would have been Emma's mother who did this, or Emma as the lady of the house. She would have done this. Or it's like, oh yes, come over for the card games. That was the sort of thing. They came over and they played quadrille, and between hands, while they lose a shilling here or a sixpence there, yeah, we'll talk 500-pound deals of corn and wheat, and oh yes, I'll rent out the land to you for. And so there were these things, and Harriet had none of that. Harriet didn't have the skill. She didn't have the connection. She didn't have the list of friends. Who were Harriet's friends? Harriet's friends were Emma and Mr. Martin's sisters. And so, she doesn't have the skills for that. She doesn't have the connections for that. And Mr. Knightley was like, all she has really going for her is that she looks nice. And Mr. Martin is happy with that. So, this is a good match for her. And I was like, no. She's my friend. And my friends are better than that. And so Mr. Knightley is like, no. And Mr. Knightley is like one of the only people on the whole planet who says no to Emma. And so she's kind of angry about that. And she's like, nice weather we're having, right? He's like, and it's amazing what silence does to people. There are a lot of people who just cannot deal with silence. And actually, this is a little secret. That is the greatest interrogation technique that the police have. They take you into a room, they sit you down, they sit down across the table from you, and they do nothing. And they wait. And people just spill. People just spill. It's like, yeah, I didn't steal the car. And the cops are like, there was a stolen car. But, yeah, silence is a great interrogation technique. And, silence is a great interrogation technique. But, and it's a weird thing that people don't do well with silence. There was a series of books that I read, it was about your age, called the Great Brain books. Anyway, Great Brain. And, part of this took place in the Great Brain books took place in Utah in the Wild West. So about 70, 80 years after Emma and Pride and Prejudice. But anyway, it took place in the Wild West out in Utah. And there was and the main character was the Great Brain. It's all told by his younger brother, John. And back then, kids were beat by their parents. If a kid disobeyed, he was beaten by their parents. But in this family, they did something different. They did the silent treatment. So if a kid misbehaved, the parents, the brothers, didn't speak to him. They were just like, and this would go on for like a week. And there were a couple of times where the main character was like, just beat me and get it over with. But no. And then finally they would break and they would have their reconciliation. And it's like, no, I will never do that again. But silence can be very painful. Very, very painful.